This is the Mazima podcast.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Mazima podcast. And this is where we speak truth to power and open accountability conversations that oftentimes are shelved. My name is Rahim Nwadi, and I'm coming to you live from the African Institute for Investigative Journalism Center and the this home for investigative journalism. And this particular segment, we want to speak to accountability during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, at the peak of the pandemic, so many things continued to unveil, and among which was government turning Namboole Stadium into a hospital. Now, Parliament passed monies to procure beds and tents, among other things, to indeed make this a hospital. But up to now, nobody has come out to speak to the question of accountability and how this money was spent. The Auditor General put out a report that up to date has never been answered and still gathers dust in some shelf in a government office. The AIIJ Unveils team has gone undercover and is now reopening conversations around the accountability. And joining me in studio is our very own Daniel Lutaaya, who has spent months looking at these documents to come up with this investigation. Good morning, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me, Rahim. Well, I'll first say it's not been an easy couple of months investigating data, because data is difficult. It's
absolutely.
Lots of graphs, lots of numbers. It was crazy. But I'm glad that I'm here at last to present my report, which is from reports that had been shelved.
All right. I can't wait to hear what you have gathered. In case you're joining us, we are coming to you live from the African Institute for Investigative Journalism. Dan, talk to us about your findings in this investigation.
Well, first things first. During the COVID-19, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit Uganda, I think it was in March 2020, President Museveni came out and asked one of his first speeches, asked Ugandans to help. I think this was the first time that the government had actually come and asked directly. And this was the head of the government himself asking for help. He said, anybody who has anything, just come out and help the government.
Yeah.
And help we did.
And we did. I remember
people came out with a lot of money.
Yeah, money.
People came out with cars.
Food.
Food.
Yeah.
There was truckloads.
Actually donated 10,000.
You see, there was I think a child that donated 2,000.
Yeah.
Then a border man. Now the president during his speeches would come out and
read these names
and read the names and say, this border man, he's from maybe which state, Natete. He has given us 2,000 shillings.
Yeah.
And there was this sense of nationalism, this sense
come out to support our very own.
Exactly. Openness. The government was open. It was, you send in your 2,000 and you're sure that on Tuesday, when the president is speaking at 8 p.m., he's going to read your 2,000. And you feel that
you've contributed.
Exactly. But also, I think in reading the contributions from people, the president was trying to do accountability.
True.
He was trying to prove to Ugandans that even if you send us 1,000 shillings,
we're transparent.
It will reach me.
Yeah.
It will reach me.
Yeah.
So I think that's what the president was trying to prove, and I think he did a tremendous job in proving that there was accountability. Unfortunately, later on things turned.
Yeah, and
now, of course, all the money for COVID-19 and items went to the National Response Fund for COVID-19. This one was also created special A special fund created. It was not going to the consolidated fund. It was not going to the Ministry of Finance. It was not going anywhere. It was not going to the Ministry of
Just there
of Health.
to, have
This
this
fund
money,
was
put it in
special. There was a national task force created for COVID-19, also special. And everything was in order, in line. It was in line. Now, the findings. Of course, in this investigation, we relied a lot on data that was already that had already been researched, verified, and presented by the Office of the Auditor General and by the Ministry of Finance. Now, maybe also to tell you the magnitude of the problem, 3.3 trillion shillings was used in COVID-19 interventions.
No way.
3.3 trillion. Now, this money was some of it was loans, some of it was our own money.
Donations.
Donations and whatever. But in the end, it was 7% of the 2020-2021 budget. 7% of the budget went to COVID-19.
Okay.
Now, we borrowed from the International Monetary Fund.
IMF.
Yeah, we borrowed from IMF, we borrowed from the World Bank, we borrowed from the African Development Bank, and also grants from the European Union, USAID, China, and the United States. And these were millions of dollars. I think the Monetary Fund gave us about 1.8 trillion shillings, $491.5 million. That was from the IMF.
Quite a huge sum.
Yes, all of these are loans. World Bank, 1.1 trillion shillings, also a loan. The African Development Bank, 115 billion Uganda shillings, $31.6 million. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And 25 billion from the Emergency and Consolidated Fund. That is our money. 94 billion supplementary budget and 109.7 million in kind and cash contributions from the public. So the public's money, all that money, the money that you sent, the money that I sent, that the Boda man sent, that the teacher sent, all
Summed
the
up
money to 109.7 million US dollars. This is all data that we got from a report by the Ministry of Finance, Budget Monitoring and Accountability Unit. They have a unit called BMAU, which is a Budget Monitoring and Accountability Unit under the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. This report was published in October 2020.
All right.
Yes. Now, according to this report, and this one I'll just give you a quote, 300 beds were moved from Namboole quarantine center. There was a quarantine center in Namboole, remember, just as you said. And these beds were moved to Mulago Hospital, according to the people at Namboole, 300 beds. But Mulago Hospital said they only received 290 beds out of the 300.
So they're done.
300 beds
were supposed to be
moved to Mulago Hospital.
But
Mulago says they only received 290 beds.
So 10 beds were missing.
10 beds were missing. I'll tell you later how much each bed costs. Then
all right, I can't wait to hear that.
So 10 beds were missing. The report also says Mulago Hospital received 108 mattresses, which were not commensurate to the beds provided. So 290 beds received by Mulago. On top of those beds, each bed was meant to come with a mattress, but they only received 108 mattresses. 108 mattresses. So about
close to half of them didn't have mattresses.
Yes, about half of those beds didn't have mattresses. 3 of the beds were already broken and they were left at Namboole. See?
3 beds were already broken.
Yeah.
In the process of carrying them from wherever they are getting them from to
Namboole.
3 of them are broken.
Broken, yeah. And these ones were left at Namboole. This is according to the report. The Ministry of Health signed also contracts. These contracts to supply beds. The company is called MSJMS. JMS. The contract was worth about 1.3 billion to supply 1,000 beds and mattresses.
1,000?
Yes, 1,000 beds and mattresses. 2,000 blankets and 2,000 bed sheets. You see? So that was 1 billion, 282 and 103 million. So the beds and mattresses, 1 billion. Then blankets, 282 million. Bed sheets, 103 million. That means every bed was costing 890,000.
My God.
890,000 Uganda shillings.
So
And each mattress was 119,491 Uganda shillings.
what kind of beds are we talking about then?
These are small beds. I think if you, for those who have not seen the beds, I think you can actually have a look at the explainer. I did an explainer video that people can look at just to see these beds. These are hospital beds. They are small beds. I was at Mulago, so I slept on one of these beds that we're talking about.
So I'm just trying to have a picture of this bed. Is it like the normal beds we see in hospitals?
No. Yeah, they are not like normal beds that you see in hospital. They are single sleeper beds. They are small. So it's only one person that can sleep on that bed.
Metallic beds.
Yes, metallic beds.
And you said it is 890,000.
Yes, 890,000 Uganda shillings and 119,491 for a mattress. Now, the JMS supplied 2,000 single-size bed sheets at a cost of 51,500 on 23rd June 2020.
Say that again.
JMS, the company, supplied 2,000 single-size bed sheets at a cost of 51,500. That was on 23rd June 2020. All the beds and mattresses were reportedly delivered. I'm just reading to you what is on the report. Reportedly. This means that the Ministry of Health officials at Namboole told the people that were doing verification from the Ministry of Finance, the people that authored this report that I'm relying on, that the beds and mattresses were all delivered. Now, here's the problem.
Keep going.
The verification team from Ministry of Finance actually only found 331 beds and mattresses.
Wait a second.
The contract was for 1,000 beds.
Wow.
The verification team only found 331 beds and mattresses.
Of the 1,000.
Of 1,000. The list of the rest of the beds was not availed.
Did you say that the team said they had delivered all of them?
Yes. The report says, and I quote, all the beds and mattresses were reportedly delivered. The report continues and says, the Ministry of Finance monitoring team verified delivery of only 331 beds and mattresses. Remember, there were meant to be 1,000 beds, and each bed had to have a mattress. So, only 331. Also, the list of the rest of the beds was not availed. Now, although over 300 beds were moved from Namboole to Mulago, Mulago, remember, had said they only received 290. So, if they found 331 beds delivered, where are the rest of the beds? About 670, about 670 beds are missing.
We're missing. Goodness
Now,
Christ.
let's talk about some of the broken ones. The
report said 3.
Yeah. Some of the broken beds delivered by JMS at Namboole Case Management Center, 11 were by the Ministry of Health. Mulago Hospital received 108 mattresses, which were not commensurate to the beds. And MS Global Center Limited supplied 2,000 single-size bed sheets at a cost of 51,500. Now, these single-size bed sheets, as I told you, the bed is a single sleeper. You can only sleep one person on this bed sheet. I have bought bed sheets before. A single-size bed sheet.
All of us have, man.
A single-size bed sheet, a single-size bed sheet is not 51,500 shillings.
It can be, absolutely.
It's bizarre that a single-size bed sheet is 51,500. And the unfortunate bit is that this money was already dished out. 103 million was already paid to the supplier. And this was made on the 23rd of June in 2020, about 2 years ago. Now, that's about beds. Have you heard of the infamous tents of Namboole? They have.
I remember
They
seeing
have.
some pictures on Twitter.
So the tents at Namboole were meant to be bought, or were bought, because remember, Namboole is a stadium. It's a football pitch.
Yeah.
It's an athletic stadium. It's not meant to host. It's not a hospital. It's not meant to host patients. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, all over the world, stadiums were being transformed into hospitals, makeshift hospitals using tents and that sort of thing, just to create an environment where people can be treated en masse, because these stadiums are big enough to host the numbers that were coming in. Thousands of people that needed to be quarantined. Now, the problem with Namboole, of course, started with the beds. The reason why the beds and mattresses and whatever were being bought, they were being bought because Namboole is a pitch that needed to be transformed into a hospital. Yeah. Now, these tents were 20 sleeper tents. They were procured. They were worth 3.8 billion, and the company that supplied them is called Lumias Uganda Limited.
Wait a minute.
They were
3.8
billion shillings.
For each or for?
No, for all of them.
You 20 tents.
Yeah, 20 tents, and each has 100 capacity. A capacity of 100 people.
Yeah.
Were meant to be able to sleep
in each of them
in these tents, and they were procured at a sum of 163 million each.
So each tent at 163
each tent, 163 million. And that's what comes up to 3.8 billion total.
All right. Maybe I'll ask about the normal prices of a tent later.
163 million. Tents are expensive. That's true. Tents are really expensive. But that's not it. That's not it with these tents.
So they're expensive?
This is not why the tents are famous. Let me tell you about why the tents are famous. First of all, the tents, they were meant to supply 20 tents. This Lumias Uganda Limited was meant to supply 20 tents. They only installed 13 at Namboole, and that was by September 2020, a month before this report was issued. Now, this is what blows my mind and blew the mind of every Ugandan, and that's why those tents became infamous on Twitter and Facebook. These tents were procured at all this amount of money, but they failed to work. They could not be used to accommodate the patients. They were too weak. Their specifications were too weak to host the patients. So 3.8 billion shillings went down the drain because the tents
were weak. So that means someone lied to the ministry of the specifications.
That's something that
we are spending 163 million on a tent that cannot even withstand rains, not even a flood.
Yeah,
rains, and we still go on to pay. And for me, this speaks about the loopholes in the procedures that we're following to procure some of these things. I know that during emergencies we follow these all pre-qualified suppliers. Yeah, but the extent at which it is costing us.
Yeah, because for me, and this is what I would do if it was my money. If it was me procuring something for myself or for my home, and I need 20 of them, I would ask for a sample first, just so I can check. Say, come to my home and install this tent. Let me see how heavy is it? How big are the metals? Can they withstand? But unfortunately, that was not done. 13 tents were installed and they didn't work. I think by the time this report was authored, the report actually has photos, if you check. And I think I'm just going to refer people to the explainer video that I made about this investigation. The photos of the tents are still there. They lay at Namboole Stadium until Namboole was turned back to a football stadium. They never worked.
Mr. Lutaaya, let's talk about the suppliers and into some of the procedures that we follow, so we can see if indeed people are profiteering from the pandemic. Because how else can you explain that you're using taxpayers' money to procure tents that cannot work? That is one. But two, and suppliers don't reach their ends of the bargain.
Yeah.
You quote 20, we pay you 20, you supply 10, and everyone keeps quiet.
I think for this one, we need to bring in an expert. I spoke to to an economic policy analyst, David Walakida, and he has followed Uganda's economic policy journey for a very long time now. He's also done some work in auditing the government, and he says it comes down to government's will to actually take these reports and act on them, because we have seen this is not the only report that is shelved. In where I mined this data from that I am presenting to you right now in this podcast, there is a lot that was mentioned. We can't pick everything out, and that's I think our role as journalists is to only shine a light and say there is something there, so that the authorities can then go there and look at these other things, because they have the resources, they have the manpower, they have whole audit, whole departments. Government has whole agencies like the Inspectorate of Government. It's a whole government agency that is just meant to investigate such things. Now, for me as a journalist, my role, Mr. Nwali, is to shine a light and say there is a report that I have seen, and that's what I'm doing right now. That's why I did that explainer video. That's why I'm doing this podcast with you. It is to say, hey, whoever is listening, there is a report that was done in 2020 and nothing has been done about it, and this happened. Go to that report. The AIIJ should be able to go to that report. The State House Anti-Corruption Unit should be able to go to that report.
And act.
And the Parliament should be able to go to that report and say, on top of the tents, there was beds, there was mattresses, there was bed sheets, there was lots of other things that were procured during COVID-19. Did we get value for money? Because, it looks like the government was taken for a ride during the COVID-19 pandemic. That is how it looks. And that is from the government's own reports. Because these are findings of a report that was done by the Budget Monitoring and Accountability Unit of the Ministry of Finance. The Minister of Finance has not changed. It is still the same Minister of Finance. The only thing that has changed is the PSST. But the minister is the same, and this agency is still, that office is still open. So I honestly think that on top of just talking about the tents, whereas I, as a journalist, want this work that I have done, this data journalism that I have done, digging up these facts, to be brought to the fore and for justice to be served with regards to the tents, but I want justice to be served with regards to the entire COVID-19 accountability, because there is a lot. If I actually only got to talk to you about the Budget Monitoring and Accountability Unit, Ministry of Finance report, if I start on the Auditor General's report, the Auditor General has actually issued 2 reports about COVID-19. They're on
to date, nobody.
Yeah, 2 reports about COVID-19. Right now, the COSASE and the Public Accounts Committee is discussing other things.
They have since moved on.
It's 2 years later. The Auditor General will release another report this year for 2021, 2022. Next year, 2022, 2023. But issues from 2020, 2021 financial year have still not been handled. And I think that is where we as the Fourth Estate are coming in. And that is why I went and combed through this document to get these facts and to put them out in the public domain.
Many thanks, and I can't agree with you, Daniel, that it is indeed our role as journalists and investigative journalists per se to speak to these and shine light in these places and speak uncomfortable conversations about most of these issues happening in the country, because I believe that we all have a duty to play. to make it even a safer place. We'll be listening in to David Walakla in just a second.
This is the Mazima podcast.
David, first of all, what is the essence of auditing? Why are we, as a country or as an organization, what is the need to audit? Why is there a need to audit?
In the management of public funds, as guided by various legal and policy frameworks, there is need to ascertain value for money. There is need to ascertain redundancies and safeguard against them. But there's also need to ensure that the legal resources are optimally used. So this is documented in the National Audit Act, in the Audit Act we have, in the PFM Act, and in other regulations, even in institutions that we have, also the Auditor General, that are mandated to do some of these. We even now have the internal audit function. So it is necessary as a means to ensure that public resources are utilized in a manner, one, as planned, but two, in the best way, looking at key factors of efficiency, effectiveness, and definitely to try and ensure that none of that was misappropriated.
And would you say that Uganda is following those procedures as you've laid them out for us when it comes to auditing?
This is that is one thing that is very clear. We do conduct the audits, as part of the requirements of the PFM cycle. After we plan, we appropriate, we spend. Ultimately, we evaluate, and among the things we do as we evaluate, we audit. Yeah, so that happens annually, or even quarterly. The internal audit functions in the institutions of government do their role. They audit. At national level, they do the same and submit these reports to the various permanent secretaries. On a quarterly basis, at district level, the internal audit function does so and has these reports discussed in the district executive committees. And annually, at the Office of the Auditor General, samples, it doesn't do 100% because of constraints, but does quite a big sample of all the government agencies, including ministries, missions abroad, districts, sub-counties, and health facilities, as it were. So yes, audits is done. But I guess so. We're thinking, so what?
Yeah, because we are looking at various documents. I've looked at the audit reports from the Ministry of Finance about COVID-19 expenditure, and also the report from the Auditor General's office. The Auditor General himself also writing about mismanagement of COVID funds. The donations. The Ministry of Finance raised issues to do with how much we were paying for a plate of food, about 50,000 in some instances for one plate of food during to the quarantine centers. A lot of irregularities, and with clear-cut evidence through these audit reports. Why do you think nothing happens after that? Right after the report is released and tabled, it is shelved.
Okay, so again, a bit of the theory. When the reports are done, they are submitted to the various responsibility accountability agencies, like I said. At national level, we have the public accounts committees, and there are three, as we have the one for local governments, the main pack for central government votes, and COSASE for statutory enterprises. So now, when these committees review these audit reports, part of what they're supposed to do is to get to the bottom of the audit issues and seek clarity from the spending agencies on the matters raised in the audit reports, just like those that you've mentioned. Audits have been done, issues have been raised. Now, these committees are supposed to figure out what happened, get in touch with the responsible MDAs, and cause action for correction where there was need. Now, this is this process is supposed to be the feedback of these committees when their reports are discussed and adopted by the whole House of Parliament. They generate what is called a Treasury Memoranda. Now, this Treasury Memorandum ideally is authored by the Minister of Finance, which then it submits to government, officially for response to the various agencies that were queried on all the issues that have been raised. Now, two things happen throughout that whole process. One, the process as documented in our framework so far is ripe for circumventing. And the first loophole, and mostly you've had some of these allegations, is that when the accounting officers responsible to answering some of these audit queries get to come into these committees to interface, to discuss the audit queries, some have been alleged to come with bags of money to further corrupt the audit process, to either have some, because these committees have the mandate to say upon satisfactory responses to these by these accounting officers, the following audit queries have been dropped from the main audit report. For me, that is the first gap. I don't think the accountability committees should have that mandate, because by the time an auditor documents an audit query, it means and you know a bit of the audit process. The last one is that they will give you a management letter, you as an accounting officer, to explain before the audit report is fully documented. Now, to the extent that an audit query is documented and remains in the report, and then for a group of non-auditors, non-accountants to sit somewhere in Parliament and say, according to what they've explained and the evidence they've brought, this is no longer an issue. But one would ask, why wasn't this evidence presented at the time of the conduct of the audit? For me, that again creates a gap and an opportunity for abuse. And so then people would think, let's frustrate you. You can document your audit reports all you want. We know when you get to the committees, we shall bring the evidence, plus, as allegations have been, underhanded ways to drop audit issues from the report, and as such, the process could be watered down. The other is that now, when you look at that same exact discussion at the district level, is that the public accounts committees, again, okay, their constitution and things of the sort, their facilitation becomes an area again that people say it's often one can say they are candidates for being corrupted because of the way that they are facilitated. Directly speaking to these that have just ended about COVID-19, for me, it's a bit beyond the committee, because again, now after the Treasury Memoranda is written, and then now they get back to the MDAs, and then they respond, because you see the Treasury Memoranda is just supposed to be audited by the Auditor General. Beyond these COVID expenditures, I will tell you, the last audited Treasury Memorandum for the government of Uganda, you can't trace it for the past 8 to 10 years. So the challenge that you're highlighting now has lived with us possibly longer, and now possibly the mismanagement as documented in those reports for the COVID funds is now highlighting how bad the problem has been, but possibly no one has conclusively done something about it.
This is the Mazima podcast.
All right. Welcome back. Great remarks from David Walakla. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you so much for keeping it Mazima podcast. We speak truth to power, and we're coming to you live from AIIJ, which is the African Institute for Investigative Journalism. We're still having a deep conversation at that, with Mr. Lutaaya on COVID-19 money accountabilities and how government spent quite heavy sums on procuring most of the things that we used. But since then, we have moved on, and conversations have been kept in shelves, dusted, and we are waiting for another report, just like we usually do it. David Lutaaya, what do you make of David Walakla's submission?
Well, I think David speaks about the same. He speaks with a lot of conviction and vigor about the school of thought that I also hold. I think that there is a need. It is there. There is a need for us to take these reports a little bit more seriously, because we pay people, to audit. There must be a reason why we do. These reports should not just sit somewhere. They shouldn't. There is a clear, and I think David actually explains the process that government is meant to go through, from auditing to reporting to action. It is all stipulated in the law and the guidelines from Parliament, from the Accounts Committee, reports from Accounts Committee to the plenary, and then parliamentary recommendation, all these things. If somebody is to be forwarded to the AIIJ, those are very clear protocols that have been laid out in the law. And I think there is need for us to let those things work. It shouldn't take a journalist to come out and look at a report and do an explainer and do a podcast like we are doing here for government to wake up and do what exactly they're supposed to do. Because we pay the auditors to do this audit. They issue reports. We pay the people that are meant to act on these reports, and that's where the disconnect is now. The first part of the process is doing their work, and now the people that are meant to act. That's where the problem is rising. Comments like presidential comments to the IGG telling her to, and David brought it out also, telling her to come to go easy on
the corrupt people.
Corrupt people because they invest in Uganda. Those maybe the president could have been joking, but it's a president. You are president.
President of this country.
Yeah, the president.
It's not a good joke.
Exactly. The presidential remarks are not taken lightly anywhere in the world. So there is need for us to take issues of accountability a little bit more seriously as a country, because in the end, it is the money that is meant to construct the roads, to put drugs in the hospitals, to put water all over this country, to electrify Uganda, this industrial revolution that we're going through as a country right now, all these industrial parks coming up here and there. We cannot fund it if we are not frugal with our money. And I think for me, that is what I hope that everyone who watches the explainer that we did about this, and anybody who listens to this podcast and hears what is happening with the COVID-19 accountability, needs to tell the government. I'm on Twitter. If you need any more information, you can just go to my DM on Twitter. If you ask if you have not read the report, I'll give you the report because it's a public document. But you can also access it if you want. They are all online. The Ministry of Finance has its online portal. The Office of the Auditor General has these online portals if you need to read these reports. But what I have done is to break it down for you in an explainer video. It's a short video, about 10 minutes, that you can actually understand the entire report, because some people may not want to read the entire report because it is a lot of work, and it took us months to come through this report just to get out those 10 minutes that can make sense to any Ugandan that understands English. Yeah.
Daniel Lutaaya, thank you so much for being with us today, and for breaking it, and for going so hard and doing your role as a journalist. Our promise to the country, and indeed the continent, is that we will keep going to these places. We will keep shining light in dark places and holding conversations that are uncomfortable to many of the people who hold power, speaking truth to power, and speaking to social justice. My name is Rahim Nwali, and thank you so much for joining us. This is Mazima Podcast. In case it's your first time listening in, kindly follow us on our socials. You can also follow what we do at the African Institute for Investigative Journalism on all our social media platforms. We will be giving you more of this detail. Many thanks and goodbye.
This is the Mazima Podcast.